How are you? So this is Friday, May the 15th. This is going to post on Monday, and we're going to talk more about global winds. Okay? Now, one of the first things we need to really talk about is why are these winds blowing? Because we talked about a land and a sea breeze, and we talked about how it could be a difference in pressure. It's the uneven heating of the earth, correct? Well, we're going to talk about a few things today. Okay, we're going to talk about how these winds begin. We're going to talk about something called latitude markers. We're going to talk about the seasons. And we're also going to talk about wind direction a little bit. So this is going to be kind of a long lesson. This is going to last you for 2 days. Okay? Now, first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the Earth. And obviously, I got this R2D2 head, which is half of the Earth. So this is going to be the northern hemisphere, okay? Which we've already talked about. It was in my lesson last week, all right? And since we're doing that, when we live in the northern hemisphere, we might as well talk about it. Southern hemisphere is going to be the exact opposite. I'm not going to get into that. If we were in school, we would definitely talk about it because there is a mirror image of each one. But first thing we need to talk about is the temperature differences, okay? Now, we are full aware, and I have talked about this a lot, that this magical line down here is the equator, okay? And the equator we talked about gets baked by the sun. It sticks out further than anything. As far as Earth goes, it's the furthest out of any other spot. So it gets a ton of heat. With all this sunshine and all this heat, it makes tons of hot air. And hot air wants to do what? Hot air wants to rise up. Well, up here at the very top of the world, we know this is all cold air. So you got hot and you've got cold. This is going to kind of sound crazy, but I want you to think about it, okay? So if we've got a super duper hot spot here and we've got a cold spot here, then we have a perfect recipe for wind. Remember when we talked about land and sea breezes, how the land would heat up and the water would stay the same, and then at night the water would stay the same, but the land would get really cold. So we had that uneven heating. So this is going to be kind of crazy. And I know it's a little confusing. It confused me a little bit too. But this is the same type of scenario, okay? So at the equator, you've got tons of heat, and heat wants to go up. It's super light. So I'm going to do this from the side so you kind of understand here. I'm going to move that actually for right now. So if I'm looking at it from the side, let's just say for some reason we're right here on the face of the earth, which obviously we would not be that big. But the heat from the equator wants to go out, okay? It rises up. And when it rises up, it leaves an empty spot, right? Just like the land and the sea breezes. And the cold air from the poles wants to come down and try to fill in from where this huge empty space is. And this is such an enormous space that we really can't even think about. I mean, think about places that are as big as the United States just being empty of hot air, and the cold air wants to come down and try to take that spot. And on top of that, we're rotating, so these winds start to go different directions. It's a lot easier if I would have had a PowerPoint and I could show you. But that's basically how these winds are made, these global winds, okay? If we were here, I could definitely go into it a little bit more, but I don't want to confuse you too bad. Now, that's how the wind's made. Now, these guys right here are going to be called latitude markers. And we're going to go over longitude. We're going to do 2 of these. It's latitude and longitude. But today we're just going to talk about latitude markers because I want you to understand where these global winds blow. They have kind of like a section. So if you look at this, you've got 3 separate sections, okay? Now, here at the equator, we always say that the equator is going to be 0 degrees, okay? 0 degrees. And if you look, and that doesn't mean that it's cold, 0 degrees. We're talking about like on a protractor. This is 0 degrees, a straight line, straight across, it's going to be 0. So the next line up, we're gonna go in increments of 30, okay, just for right now. But remember, this goes up 10, 20, 30, 40, it goes up just like a protractor. This one right here is gonna be 30 degrees. So if we're going up by 30s, we go 30. This next one's gonna be 60. And then if you go all the way to the top, that's gonna be 90. And you could even draw you a 90-degree angle to remember that. Okay, so 90 degrees up, you're gonna have coldest part of the earth. Now these come in handy when we're trying to plot a specific place on a map. And we'll talk more about this later. It's kind of cool. It's kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack, but you're doing it with numbers. Now, if you live in the 0 to 30 degree latitude area, you are considered to be in the lower latitude, okay? If you are between 30 and 60 degrees, you are in, obviously we call it the mid latitude, okay? And then if you're up here between 60 and 90, this is gonna be the upper latitudes, all right? Now, I'm actually only gonna give you this one thing, well, actually we're gonna keep going. So lower latitude, mid latitude, and upper latitude. We live in the 30 to 60 degree latitude area, okay? Now, there's something really special about this area. We have a wind that comes from the west to the east, and this is a west wind because it comes from the west, all right? You don't categorize winds where they blow to, you categorize where they are blowing from. So it is blowing from the west, so it is going to be a westward wind. And we call these what? The prevailing westerlies, okay? Now, there's something really cool about the mid-latitudes, and I bet you're thinking about it in your head. Think about it. If we're in the mid-latitudes, and we're sometimes hot, we're sometimes cold, we're sometimes in the middle, then we're going to go through all 4 seasons in the mid-latitudes. So you have 4 seasons in the mid-latitudes. Now, if you're in the lower latitude or the upper latitude, you see either a lot of heat and just a little bit of winter, or a whole lot of winter and just a small bit of heat. So you're only going to have 2 seasons, all right? So if you like a lot of hot air, then you should probably move to the lower latitudes. Not unless you're going to live on top of a mountain, then it's going to be cold. If you like chilly air, you could move up here to the North Pole, or you could live on any mountain that's over like 10,000 feet and you'll get plenty cold. Don't worry about that. So you got the upper with 2 seasons, the mid latitudes with 4 seasons, and the lower latitudes with 2 seasons, excuse me. So real quickly, let's talk about these winds, and then I'm going to end this lesson because I know I'm getting a little long. If this blows through the west and it's blowing towards the east and it blows over a desert, this is going to be hot and a dry wind, okay? Because hot air can sometimes be hot, and it can sometimes be dry, and it can sometimes be wet. Sometimes we have a lot of wet, hot air here because we're right near the Gulf of Mexico, which is like a big big bath of like 95-degree water. But when these blow over the deserts, they generally are hot and dry. We don't get those all the time. Sometimes we do. Up in the upper latitudes, these are going to be called the polar easterlies. Now, when I draw these go just like this. And where are they blowing from? They are blowing from the east. That's why they are called the polar easterlies, okay? That's why they're called the polar easterlies. All right, and then the last one. This is going to be the trade winds. The trade winds have the same exact flow as the polar easterlies, but they're a very different wind. Polar easterlies are frigid, freezing cold, and generally frozen air is very dry as well. All right, Sometimes wind that comes out of a desert's gonna be super dry, cause think about it, can it pick up any moisture as it blows across the land? No, because there's no moisture in the desert, so it's not gonna pick up moisture. Same thing for the upper latitudes. Cold air and snow is generally dry. We get a really wet snow around here, really good for throwing snowballs. Up here, it's so cold you can't make a snowball. The snow is so fine, it won't pack together. So that's that. Now this one right here, these are the trade winds, and the trade winds are gonna have the same flow as the polar easterlies. However, what are these winds gonna be like? Since they are down here at the equator and they get tons of heat, and most of the equator is water, what's that heat gonna make that water wanna do? It's gonna make it wanna evaporate. And when water starts rising like that, it gets really hot and humid, just like it does around here in the summer. Just like we talked about how you can go out into your yard in the middle of the summer and you could just be talking to your neighbor and you have water droplets going down your head. Well, that's not because you've been exercising, it's because all the water vapor in the air is coming and sticking to you. And then you start to sweat it off. Well, not sweat it off, it's just water droplets falling off of you. So down here, this is not just gonna be a hot wind, but this is going to be very hot. And on top of that, it's gonna be really wet. So hot and wet. Here in the mid latitudes, we got hot and dry. In upper latitudes, this is gonna be cold and dry, all right? Now, I know I've thrown a lot at you today, and I know this looks a little crazy, but everything's in its right spot. I'm gonna give you 4 questions on this, and we might do the same video the next day with 4 more questions, okay? I haven't really figured out what I wanna do, because this is a tough thing to teach with you not being in front of my face. It's a lot easier when you're in front of me. I can go over it a lot more. But listen, do the best you can with the questions. If you have any questions about this, just drop me a line. I know some of you guys have sent me messages and I don't see them until like a week later, and I want to apologize for that. I'm not the best on Google Classroom yet, but I'm learning. I'm getting better. I've caught up on all my grading, so I should be able to keep up with it. So I'm going to give you some questions on this, and then on Tuesday I'll give you 4 more questions on this same video. Okay? I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday.